Today we're going to transform a single layer cake into a quilt design that looks complex, but it's surprisingly easy to create. With just 40 squares, a couple of contrasting fabrics, we used white and grey fabric, and a bit of creative cutting, this project comes together faster than you'd think. So let's get started. Now the first thing we're going to do is open up the layer cake pack, and we're going to be using 40 of these squares for our quilt, and since my pack has 42 squares, I will have 2 left over that I will use for another project. I'm going to start by separating the 40 squares into 2 piles. The first pile will have the 20 squares that are going to be the feature pieces, so I'm going to choose the prettiest of the fabrics for those, and as you can see here, I'm going with the flowers and some other colourful fabrics. The remaining 20 pieces will go into the second pile, and for this particular layer cake, these are mostly fabrics patterned with dots and a few other tone-on-tone patterns. So I've sorted my squares into the 2 piles, and I'm going to put aside the feature squares and just work with the patterned pieces. I'm going to take each square in that pile and cut it into quarters. So I'll line up the ruler on the 5-inch mark and then slice through the middle. And then I'll turn it around and slice through the other side. This will give me 4 pieces, and I'll repeat that with all of the 20 patterned squares. I have one of those rotating mats, which makes this a whole lot easier to do, and I'll put a link to that in the description field below. But if you don't have a rotating mat, you can still do this on your regular mat. So I've finished cutting the squares, and I now have 80 5-inch squares plus my original 20 10-inch feature pieces. But for the moment I'm going to set them all aside because I want to start working on my contrasting fabric pieces. Now the sponsor of today's video is Craftsy, an amazing online hub where you can learn, create and get inspired. They offer classes on loads of different crafts, including quilting, sewing, applique, baking, cake decorating, you name it. We recently watched a class on organising the perfect quilting studio, as we're currently redoing our craft room and just needed some tips and inspiration. We've purchased an electric up-down or sit-stand table, which is just wonderful. We love it. It meant getting rid of a large cabinet, but the room is now so much more airy and open. So this class was very helpful as it covered everything from clever storage solutions for fabrics and tools to layout ideas that maximise workspace and flow. Craftsy's expert instructors walk you through each technique, sharing their pro tips, and the classes are so engaging. It's like having a personal coach by your side. And we have a special offer for you. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the video description will get a full year of premium membership to Craftsy for only $1.49. Now that's a huge discount compared to the normal price at $123. So let's get back to the quilt. These blocks are super easy to make because all we need to do is sew some strips together and cut. So I'm going to cut 10 strips of grey fabric, and I'm also going to cut 20 strips of the white fabric. Now you can choose whatever colours you like for your contrast fabrics, but I went with the grey and white, although I was a bit concerned that the grey might be too intense. Let me know in the comments field what you think. So now I have my strips cut. I'm going to take a piece of the white fabric and open it out, and then a piece of the grey fabric and line it up along the white piece, and I'll take another white piece and do the same. And what I'm going to do is sew these 3 pieces together. And I'll do the same with the remaining strips so that I'll end up with 10 strip sets, and I have 5 in this pile and 5 in this one. And the reason I have them separated is because of the way I've pressed them, and I'll show you that in a second. But you can see that I've lined them up at one edge, and when you come down to the other end you'll see that they don't line up, but that's fine because we'll be trimming these up. Now as long as you have 40 inches of fabric you'll have enough to work with. So you can see here in this first pile I have pressed these seams to the white side of the fabric, and in the second pile you can see that I've pressed the seams to the middle, and the reason I've done it this way is so that the seams will nest together nicely when we piece these together. Now we just need to cut these strips into smaller pieces, so I'm going to trim the edge first to remove the selvage and to get a nice straight edge to work with. And then I'm going to line up my ruler on the edge of the strip along the 5-inch mark on my ruler. I always like to line up the ruler along one of the seam lines as well, so that I know that I'm cutting in a nice straight line. And then I'm going to cut, and I will repeat that all the way down the strip. You should end up with 8 pieces for each strip set, so once you've cut all of the remaining strip sets, you will end up with 80 pieces in total. So I have 2 piles here, and there are 40 strips in each pile, and as you can see, these are the ones that are pressed to the outside, and these are the ones that I have pressed to the inside. So I have everything ready to go, and at this point you should have 20 layer cake squares, 80 5-inch squares, 40 strip pieces pressed inwards, and 40 pieces pressed outwards. To make up each block, you're going to need 1 of the 10-inch squares, 4 of the 5-inch squares, and 4 of these strip pieces that we made up. And you'll need 2 that are pressed to the inside and 2 that are pressed to the outside. Now this may seem like a bit of fussing around, but believe me, it will pay off in the end. Now I'm going to take 2 of the strips that are pressed to the inside, and I'm going to place one on the left side and one on the top edge of the block. Then I'll take the strips that are pressed to the outside and place one on the right side and one on the bottom. And then you'll take your 5-inch pieces and place one of them in each corner. Now you can randomly make up the blocks, but I'm going to lay all of my pieces out first so that I can make sure that I'm not doubling up in certain areas. Now we're ready to sew the blocks together, and if you have laid them out like I have, just remember that the strip pieces at the top and the left side are the ones with the seams facing inwards, and the ones on the bottom and on the right side are the ones facing outwards. I'm going to start by sewing on the strip pieces to each side of the block, and I'll be using a 1/4-inch seam. And once they're sewn on, I'm going to sew the 5-inch squares at the top onto the strip piece, and I'll do the same with the pieces at the bottom. So I have those pieces sewn, and now I just need to sew them onto the centerpiece. So that's our block finished, and I'm just going to turn it over to show you how I've pressed it, and you can see here that these seams are pressed to the inside and these seams are pressed to the inside. Now when we come to the next block, we'll be pressing this one differently. We'll be pressing the seams to the outside. And then as we come to the pressing on each block, we'll alternate the way we press between each one. On the next row up, you need to alternate again. So you would start with a block with the seams pressed outward, and then the next is inward, and so on. This all helps to nest the seams nicely, and that is going to help you to have seams that join nicely. Now that all my blocks are sewn, I'm going to start sewing them together into rows, so I'll do that all the way up the quilt. And now that we have our rows sewn, all I have to do is sew them together to form the quilt top. And there you have it, our quilt top is done. So thank you for watching, and if you've enjoyed this tutorial, please give us a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one.